Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thanks again for the invitation. Some of you may have seen this presentation, so I apologize if that's the case. But I'm going to talk today about. First technical difficulty here. Sorry about that. You'd think I'd have zoomed down to a fine art by now, but I have harvest brain. So today I'd like to talk about a case study of some of the practices that we've been implementing at my orchard, and talk about how does one go about focusing on regenerative agriculture. And so I think it's very important that we define regenerative agriculture, because this is not about organic agriculture. This is not about, in our minds, about doing something different in order to protect environmental health or increase human health or any of that sort of thing, although they can be. My venture into regenerative agriculture was to increase the yields on our farm and to maximize our profits. And that really was the principle behind our adoption of regenerative agricultural processes, because we really can accomplish higher yields and more profits by utilizing regenerative agriculture. Michael, I'm getting a bunch of Zoom notifications about the waiting room popping up on my screen, and it's going right in the middle. I don't know how to turn those off. If there's something you can do, I'd appreciate it. Okay. So in agriculture, we face a lot of challenges, and these are some of my favorites. One is definitely, how do we motivate young people to come into our industry, the millennials? And I always thought I was one of the youngest people in the room, and unfortunately, I still am one of the youngest people in the room when I'm in my, when I'm pushing mid-40s. But how do we recruit young people to come into agriculture? How do we deal with labor shortages from immigration rules and that sort of thing? That's very big here in the United States, as well as regulatory action by our state governments that are becoming more and more disconnected from agriculture as our society, Western society, moves more. It was grandma and grandpa farmed. Now it's no one can remember anybody that farmed. And those folks are making our regulations and our workforce coming up. And then, of course, there's always trade issues that come about. But I would argue that regenerative agriculture is a good way to motivate young people to come into our industry, because it's very, very challenging. I think all too often farmers become just like a technician, where we receive an order from our ag chemical salesperson and we just implement that. And that really loses the art of farming. And a lot of young people are very keen on the intellectual challenges that doing something different than just receiving a script from an ag chemical house and executing that script. They're keen on figuring those things out. Our labor shortages also can be dealt with by regenerative agricultural practices, in that we can afford to be more creative with our labor, even pay people more if our crop is worth significantly more, both how much we pick per acre and what the price we receive is, and the percent that we pack out. Those are all things that boost our bottom line, that give us the room to do more creative things with labor. And I always say that labor is a challenge, only limited by the amount of money you have to put into labor. And so if you're able to generate more net revenue per acre, that's a great way to solve your labor challenges. Trade challenges, well, those you can only solve in the United States with an election. So we farm in a very, very beautiful, beautiful area here. And, you know, I've been in Tasmania, I've been in Adelaide and the Victoria area. It's all gorgeous as well. And agriculture has a lot to offer. And I love it. And so I really believe that regenerative agricultural practices rekindled my love of the land and of farming, because I was finding it more and more difficult to be on the treadmill, pushing conventional agricultural practices to the max. And I was finding a diminishing return on, you know, is there a better fertilizer? Is there a better this? Is there a better that? And what I found is the opportunity, the amount of advancement you can have for your business has really increased, really increased by regenerative practices. And what I mean by that is if you haven't implemented any of them, you can make some big strides forward quickly. And that's really appealing to me. So the challenge that we face in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon and Washington is there's just a lot of orchards that are being planted and have been planted, and they all pick at the same time. You know, if I was, I guess if I was more Southern Hemisphere minded, I would have some satellite images of the amount of fruit that's being planted in Chile. It blows my mind how much those folks are putting in, the amount of money and effort being put into there. Regenerative practices are a way that you can stay above the morass and keep competitive. That's any amount of efficiencies can be gained or increased profits. We really have to utilize those, because just doing the same thing we always have is definitely a losing battle with the amount of acres that we have planted and the amount of yield that's being achieved by those acres. You know, here at Orchard View, we'll pick around 15,000 tons of fruit this year. We're small compared to some of our competitors, and just blows my mind that that's the case. When I farmed independently, it was a huge year for me if I picked 2,200 tons. That was a big year. And you know, so the scale of agriculture is really increasing. And so if you don't have the option of increasing your acres, then you have to increase the efficiency at which you farm those acres. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can you know, you can adopt all sorts of expensive technologies. Here in the Northwest, we have covered orchards. We're looking at different types of covers that we can put on. And if you see here, this is Oval Fruit Company's, one of their orchards along the river, and it's almost entirely covered. And that's pretty amazing when you think about the investment that went in there. You know, you're looking at upwards of $15,000 an acre to cover that orchard, but they believe that the returns are there. There's always our favorite talk, you know, about training systems, varieties, and that sort of thing. But there's only so much opportunity to be had there as well, because everybody else is doing the same thing. Everybody else is trying to find that best training system, the best varieties to put in. And man, some of those systems, when you put those in, these high density systems, and we have some, we can accomplish, you know, 12, 15, 18, even 20 plus tons per acre of yield of good quality fruit, believe it or not. And so the landscape's changing for us. And we can't just count in cherries on newer and newer technology. You know, everyone's dream is to be able to mechanically harvest cherries, and that's going to save us. Well, we can't do it in apples yet. Maybe we're close, but I've heard that for like the last 5 years now, that this coming year is going to be when robotic harvest and things goes along. And so the other thing I think that's very important is many of the newer technologies, like covering our orchards, like automated harvest or even platform assisted harvest. You know, how are we going to implement those on old trees like this? This is a Bing on Mazard orchard that was planted in 1986. We have a lot of these in our systems. This is probably truly a dinosaur now. but believe it or not, it's the first orchard I remember planting as a kid. And my neighbor drove by when we were planting this orchard, and he said, that's too close. You're never going to be able to farm that ground. And that spacing is 22 feet by 24-foot spacing. Now we look at 11 by 6-foot spacing, 11 by 4-foot spacing, and that is high density. And so believe it or not, where my pickup is parked there, we used to have tours when that orchard was young, and this was high density farming. There's just a lot going on, but the real challenge is that we can't afford to just flip a switch and replant all of our acres to these higher density, more efficient rootstocks varieties and training systems. We have to figure out ways that we can maximize revenue coming from these orchards that we have. And regenerative practices are something that you can apply to any acre on your farm, no matter how old it is. And I have seen that it provides a benefit, even on these old trees that are, getting on 30 plus years old. It's always amazing to look at what was new technologies. This is spraying orchards in the Mid-Columbia area here in my area. And the new innovation there's several of them. One is that you have a gas-powered Caterpillar tractor instead of horses drawing, a gas-powered sprayer that's applying lead arsenic dust there to those trees. And you notice there's a totally Bureau of Labor legit employee driving the tractor there. I don't know, that kid looks like maybe they're about 4 years old. And they, of course, have on all the PPE that we were required to wear. So things have changed a lot since then. Things are continuing to change. And if we don't adopt and adapt, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be dinosaurs like what we're looking at here. So when I was looking at our production systems, the soil is where we have a tremendous opportunity. We had really gotten to where we were close to maximizing our efficiencies to be had in the canopies that we're managing, the varieties, the rootstocks, training systems, and things. It was getting harder and harder to eke out additional profits by going tighter, going smaller, going more high density, or the newest variety. And so the soil was a completely untapped resource for us. And what the principle we applied is that by enhancing our soils, we are able to grow bigger leaves. And it's really leaves that we really want to grow leaves, because those are the engines that drive the generation of big cherries there. So big leaves make big cherries. And for us here, and I'm sure, and for you, my friends in Australia, if you can export those cherries, and they're big and they can last shipment to Asia, those are the cherries that really can pay the bills versus selling here domestically. I don't know. Maybe it's different in Australia, but I don't think so. So it's really easy for us to forget that below the soil, there's an equal amount of biomass below the soil as there is above the soil in a tree. And that's not the exciting part of the tree. The roots are kind of ugly. They're kind of boring. You can't see the darn things. And you can't see what's going on in the roots, but you can see the results in the canopy and the leaves and the fruit. And so I think for a long time, conventional agriculture has taken the hydroponic approach to providing nutrition to our trees. That we treat trees and the nutrients that we're applying to trees as really a hydroponic type system, where we apply ion-based fertilizers to our orchards, ion-based nutrients, and we forget that the biology that is in the soil is really what drives the nutrient uptake of our trees. Trees can be fertilized and maintained, and they have been for a long time, in many cases, through a purely hydroponic type approach, where you don't really worry about the life in the soil. You just give the tree the ions it needs and rinse and repeat. But if you apply regenerative principles and really focus on the biology in the soil, you're going to trump any chemical efforts that you're making, and you're really going to be the most efficient at boosting your target crop. by having the soil biology provide what it needs through the soil food web. And it's really an amazing thing how much the soil can provide for our trees, and also how much energy the trees themselves provide to the organisms in the soil. And once you're able to have the crop itself working for you in your fields, it is quite noteworthy how much more oomph you get out of each acre that you farm. So I don't want to sound like our businesses have not focused on soil health at all. We have, but the soil health in the past on my farm has been really applying lime. So we thought we were boosting the soil by, we do a soil test every year, and we'd watch that pH. And then we thought by fixing our pH problems, which we created ourselves, by the way, we were really helping the soil, and that was it. But again, that's treating the soil like a hydroponic system, like just a media that the trees are stuck into, like the flowers at your florist shop. And so the regenerative principles that we apply here at our farm are really focused on, they're focused on the soil. And I can break it down to kind of some big areas where we apply compost, we cover crop, we apply mulches, which are really important, and then we apply biostimulants, which are targeted nutrient applications to boost the soil, either through sprays or through fertigation. So biostimulants are a really, really great way for us to increase the amount of biology in our soil. They speed up the soil biological and chemical processes to enhance our soil. And if you're to dig trenches in your soil, you can see here in the images that plant roots do a lot to the soil. They change the soil chemistry. And if we look here at the picture, you can see just how dark that real mineral soil is, where the orchard roots are active. So the more roots you can pump into there, the more biology you can get going, the better our soils are going to be. And this is a picture of one of our cover crop plants that I just went out and yanked out of the ground. And if you look at the soil structure there, you can see that all of the soil is aggregates. The soil is not a brick. And believe me, some of our soils here in the Dallas area, you can use for bricks. We can make an adobe house out of them real easy. But if you look here, all that soil, it's all aggregated. You can see mycorrhizal fungi there. You can see all the plant roots reaching out and permeating every part of that soil, as well as the fungal hyphae. Those are the types of soils that are going to provide our crop with the most amazing horsepower, something far beyond anything we could put on by lime, gypsum, urea, calcium nitrate, whatever type of fertilizers you want to put on there, would never be matched by the soil structure that's there. And so I like to also say that we can take very, very poor soils, and by revving the biology up, we can have them perform comparably to really good soils, because the biology in those soils is able to, even if the soil is quote unquote poor ground, it's able to provide the crop with what it needs to maximize our opportunity there. So cover crops have been central for our operation. We cover crop in fields that we're renewing. So we go in when we remove an orchard after harvest. We'll typically remove just after harvest, within the first few weeks after we're done picking. We'll go in with heavy equipment. We'll remove the trees, tear out all the irrigation system, and we'll rip that ground and we'll disc it and we'll plant it to cover crop. And then we'll leave that cover crop in place for at least one full year. The reason being that we want to build the soil structure for the next orchard that's going to be planted there. It allows our soil pathogens to get wiped out by the biology, the organisms that are going to take advantage of the cover crop and live in the soil. And it also allows us to get rid of root suckers, which are particularly dangerous vectors for us of some diseases like little cherry virus and Western X disease, which I don't know if you have in Australia, but you probably have your version of those types of things. So it lets us knock those suckers out and get rid of them, build our soil structure, and knock our pathogens out and help our biology. So this is a cover crop that's planted in a young block there. You can see the trees there kind of in the row. And then this is a cover crop that's winter killed down. It's tillage radish, which you can see here in the pictures. Tillage radish is a really awesome way to open up your soil structure mechanically. So the radishes get really huge. They grow these great big roots, and they winter kill down. And then in the winter and spring, those holes are left. You know, they're that big around. You can grab these things with your hand. It's like holding the end of a baseball bat. And you just have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of holes down, thousands, I should say, in your orchard. And you can see here in the lower left, you can see the tillage radish is kind of dead there and it's rotted out. Now you have this great big hole that's a few inches across and sometimes goes down 12, 14, 18 inches down into the ground. And in the close-up there, you can see a plant root actually utilizing that tillage radish hole to reach down into the deeper parts of the soil. We also plant mustard cover crops, and this is a cover crop that we planted, and this is about just less than a month old, and these cover crops just really grow super well, and all the photosynthetic activity that's taking place there is concentrating root exudates in the soil that's going to enhance our soil biology, and again really make it hard for those pathogens that we have to watch for replant disease to have any chance against the soil biology that's enhanced by these cover crops. So one of the things I really focused on was how can we enhance cover crops more? And that there's actually been some great research come out of Australia actually on grazing cover crops. And so I got cows and I started running cows over our cover crops. And cows are a unique challenge. My family had 45 cow-calf pairs when I was a kid. And, the problem, what we really need with a cow is we really need the front end of the cow and the back end of the cow, because it's the cow manure that provides us with a tremendous benefit. The problem is that there's the cow in between the mouth and the bunghole there that makes the manure. And those cows, they live to get out. They have to be managed. They want to throw calves at inopportune times at night. You got to deal with all sorts of management issues with cows. And so what we focus on here is using earthworms as our cow. And there's all sorts of literature out there that says that there's roughly a few 1,000 pounds of beef worth of earthworms for every acre of your orchard. And so we really started focusing on how can we move away from grazing cows, which are a big management problem, to utilizing earthworms in our fields. How can we enhance them so that we can have a passive way of having cows there? And you can see that we were doing rotational grazing, and that's always exciting, but that takes a lot of management. So the key for us with increasing our earthworms was to use mulches. And what we started out doing was we started out utilizing compost applications as a form of mulch for us to cover our soil and enhance those earthworms and the soil biology associated with them. And that is one heck of an industrial process. We were trucking compost up, thousands of yards at a time from a facility over an hour's drive away from our farm. And then we were bringing out all this heavy equipment to apply the compost. And it got to be where it was just really difficult for us. And the reason that we were willing to do that was we wanted to cover our soil up with something. And, if you had a flower garden or a vegetable garden, compost is great. And the reason that we saw such a big benefit from the compost is that in forest trees, which cherries are an understory tree, they have a vast majority of their roots at the very top of the soil. That's where the roots are concentrated. And if you have a bare soil with a herbicide maintained strip, you just don't get roots at the top of the soil. But also, if you have a grass cover crop there going right up to the trunk of the tree, you also don't get roots. And so you can see here, there's been lots of studies done that show that in many forest trees, there's actually significant portion of the roots just grow in the duff above the soil. And if you look at this apple tree, which we can extrapolate, it's going to be similar to a cherry tree. You can see this apple tree that was carefully excavated at the Mulching experiment station in Britain. Look at how many the roots just radiate out and they stay at the top of the soil. So we are applying compost in order to do that with our roots. So you might think, well, what if cherry roots aren't the same way? So here's one of my friends, Gary Redding, a crop consultant. And you can see him holding, this is a Regina tree on Gisela 12. I think this is like 20 years old. And look at the roots on that thing. They don't go down to the center of the earth. They don't go down very deep. Those roots are less than a foot below the soil. And so I really believe that covering the soil with some kind of compost or some kind of mulch rather was really important. And so we went the compost route, but the difficulty there was that we spent a lot of money on it. And so, you know how you can sometimes find things out by accident. So one of the things that we found out is that we could put down compost and mulch. Compost is a form of mulch. And then we could spray biostimulant sprays on top of that mulch right after we applied it. And that would really rev up the soil biology. And so you can see here, this is an old Bang on Mazard tree, which is in this picture, that thing's over 30 years old. And again, we can rev those things up by just applying mulch underneath them and biostimulants. So you can see here that we applied our biostimulant as a spray with a weed boom, just going over the top of the mulch. But look at right there in the very center of the tree row, you can see that my applicator was getting lazy and he didn't want to jimmy jam his tractor in and out of the row. He wanted to just go straight. So he made it to where his boom was just barely passing by the outside of the trunk. But you can see that he was missing the center of the mulch row there. And look at where you can see right where that spray went down. This is the next morning. You can actually see all of the white, either fungi or actinomycete. Anyway, you can see all the microbiology that's just been flared up just overnight by the application of that biostimulant there. And so you can actually get a very, very powerful effect in your orchard by utilizing biostimulants. In this case, it was fish emulsion and a seaweed emulsion applied just on top of our mulch. It's not rocket science, just use an herbicide tank and a weed boom and put it on top there. But we really were able to enhance the biology of the soil or the biological activity in the mulch there, which is then going to benefit our soil biology as well. So one of the things that I started doing is looking at, can we cover crop in within our farmed acres? So instead of waiting to cover crop only when we're renewing an orchard, could we cover crop in between in the alleyway in existing orchards? So what we started doing was we started looking at various ways that we could plant cover crops in the alleyway and then grow them in the alleyway, which is really great because you don't have to then haul mulch. So you might be asking, like, how in the heck are you doing that? Well, I don't know. In 2002, I was at I think it was at Kim Green's place in Adelaide there, and he just like cut the side of his service mower out and was blowing grass out the side. So our thought is we can combine cover cropping and mow and blow mulch and get it going. But what we did is we got a Nobili side discharge flail. We had to bring it in from, they're produced in Europe, where there's an auger at the back of the flail. So we already have to mow our orchards. We already mow them. But what I wanted to do was be able to get mulch in the tree rows from a cover crop grown in the alleyway so that I didn't have to pay it was almost $1,600 an acre for us to buy compost and get it applied on a per acre basis. That's a lot of money. And we were able to see a return on that investment. But if we could grow it in the alleyway and blow it over with an activity that we already do, that was a really promising thing to do. I'm getting some feedback, Michael, by the way, from someone's mic clunking around or something. But anyway, so we were able to prove this concept, and we really like it, where we grew a cover crop of Sudan grass, which is a hot weather grass, sorghum Sudan, hybrid. And we grew that up in the alleyway, and you can see it doesn't have to be above a person's head in order to produce one heck of a lot of green manure mulch on top of that ground there. So I mean, I'll kick that stuff around with my feet. That's a lot of mulch being added to the tree row. And just by covering the soil again, we're enhancing the biological activity of the organisms for the roots that reside in the top of that soil. If we leave it open and bare, we really just cook the biology in the sun. And that's something that's not good. But at the same time, we can't grow grass or really any other type of weeds or cover crop there in the tree row because we have our sprinklers to worry about. And so it's kind of a catch-22. But by mowing and blowing this mulch over, we were able to be really successful. So the other thing we started doing is doing sap analysis to look at what's going on in the sap of the trees, and our biological enhancing and regenerative agricultural practices really making a difference. And so by examining the nutrient levels in the sap, not in the dry tissue method, but actually extracting sap and then analyzing the nutrients that are present in the vascular tissue of the plant's moving around, by comparing those nutrients, we were able to see that the real-time impact of our regenerative practices was making inroads for us here. And that sap analysis is a whole topic on its own. And if it's something that you aren't familiar with, you should get on YouTube and just Google sap analysis. It's a really powerful tool. And even if you just are purely conventional and think all this regenerative stuff is a bunch of baloney, sap analysis can help you too. So one of the things that we always want to focus on is silver bullets. And it's, I think, very, very important that we don't forget that no matter what you want to do, if you don't prioritize the horticultural needs of your crop first, it doesn't matter what type of regenerative agricultural practices you're applying. Regenerative agriculture doesn't replace good horticultural techniques. So you need to make sure that no matter what, you're irrigating your crop right. No matter what, you're controlling your pest and disease and your weeds, that you're pruning right, that you have the right nutrition program. I think too often we want to focus on silver bullets, which should be the last thing we go to. And so before you start doing these regenerative practices, look at the very, very basics of how you're farming to make sure that you are doing those right, because it might be worth your investment of time and capital and energy into just doing a better job pruning, or a better job with your pest and disease management, or a better job especially with your irrigation, because that's where it all starts. So don't get too gung-ho about saying, well, I put on compost, so that's going to make up for all my poor irrigation practices. It's not how it works. It's the other way around. Of course, the idea of putting things in the spray tank, spraying it on, and just being regenerative, that also doesn't work. You really need to focus on a complete picture. And the amazing thing is that a friend of mine, John Kemp, from a company called Advancing Eco Agriculture that he founded, he talks about things like a plant health pyramid. And check it out. where plants themselves, when you provide the plant with what it needs, over time, that plant can then become far more resistant to pest and disease, far more resistant to sucking and chewing insects, to, I don't know if you have powdery mildew in Australia, I can't remember. We have it here, and it's a plague for us. Your crop itself can become resistant to those pests and to certain diseases, or maybe all diseases, some would argue, but I haven't seen that yet. Pseudomonas is something that we've been able to completely eliminate in some blocks that were on the verge of being destroyed by it, by increasing just the health of our plants through regenerative processes. So again, we have seen really big benefits to our bottom line, because after labor, a big line item for us is our crop protection activities that we put on. Not necessarily in the cost per acre of materials, but it's really in the labor and the management time that go into them. The other thing that we've seen on our blocks that are under regenerative practices is that we have a far greater resistance in those blocks to environmental stresses like rain cracking, believe it or not, like heat stress and cold resistant. We have seen multiple times where blocks that are under regenerative practices are more resistant to heat, more resistant to rain, and definitely a big boost for us that was really unexpected. In fact, at first, when I was working with the consultants that helped me with regenerative processes, I thought that was a bunch of baloney, until we had a historic freeze in 2014 that killed some of our blocks. And then blocks that were right next to it that were under biological system, when we were comparing the two, were fine. That blew my mind. Rain cracking as well, where we had roughly 20% less rain cracking in our same variety, same orchard, but just one side was biological in regenerative processes and the other wasn't. Pretty remarkable. I would have never thought about it. Lynn Long, who many of you probably know, is a good friend of mine. He has a YouTube video YouTube interview that he did with John Kempf about the impact we had on bacterial canker of one of our blocks. Just Google Lynn Long bacterial canker on YouTube and check it out. Okay, but it really does boil down to, are we able to generate more money? And this is just simply looking at our mow and blow mulching. So if we look at the row size that we're able to generate and the sales price that we get for row size, and we didn't look at yield because that's really complicated, and I didn't want to spend time with buckets and bins. But if we just picked the fruit from one side of a field that's under regenerative practices that have mulch, and picked the fruit from the other side of a field and just ran those through packing and look at the row size, the increase in row size that we have was generating us, a couple of $1,000 an acre in return. And that's nothing to, that's nothing to laugh at. That's a big deal for us. And we don't do that every time at every orchard, but the trend is definitely that we increase our net revenue, even after we look at what our expenses are. And over time, those expenses are lessened as we bring more acres in and have less that we're working on. So I really appreciate your time. I do have a YouTube channel where I probably swear in too many of the videos and probably get beeped by YouTube. But if you want to learn more about some of the things that we're doing here, this was just a 30,000 foot view of some of the practices that we've done. Mostly made a lot of mistakes, but we've had some successes, and talk about those on my YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out and learn more. And I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to answer some of them.
Thanks, Mike. That was absolutely fascinating. Do we have any questions from the audience? If so, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask them.
Hi, Mike. This is Bryce here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey.
Hi, Mike. Look, we've got a small cherry orchard up in the Yarra Ranges. We took over what was essentially a pretty conventional cherry orchard just last year, and we've just had our first season which finished obviously in January, February this year. When we took it over, the previous farmer, the way that he was running it was, as I said, quite conventional, a lot of spraying and that sort of thing, which we continued. We really want to try and move away from that this year. I suppose, what advice can you give, I suppose, a pretty new cherry farmer when it comes to moving away from pesticides, herbicides, that sort of thing? We, just want to try and move away from as much as we can as quickly as possible.
So that's a really good question. And I would say you can't move away from it instantly or you will suffer greatly. The ecosystem of the orchard that you have needs to be restored before it can take care of itself. And the ability to move away from your, I'll just say ag chemical inputs, it's something that has to be earned. It's not just an event, it's a process. So the first thing that you need to do, in my view, is you need to get mulch of whatever kind: straw, wood chips, cardboard, composted manure, green manure. Get something covering the soil underneath your trees in the row, because only then can your soil really, really start to build. You should adopt SAP analysis to control your nutrient inputs, and you need to be prepared to wean yourself off of ag chemical inputs. Don't give them up entirely, because your system won't be able to take care of itself. We cut back on our ag chemical inputs, but they can't, over a period of years, they can't be eliminated entirely. Be very, very careful about that. Again, I mentioned John Kempf. He's a good friend of mine. Very, very knowledgeable person. You could listen to some of his podcasts that he does on YouTube or to get knowledge. You're going to have to gain a lot of knowledge as a new person, but be prepared to move in a direction, but be patient.
Thanks, Mike. And just on John Kempf, how do you spell his name and how would I find him on YouTube? It's
John, and his last name is Kempf, and he's with Advancing Eco Agriculture. And if you just Google my name on YouTube, I've been interviewed by him. I don't get any plug or anything from them. He's just somebody I really, really like. And one thing I like about his approach is he's a realist and he's a pragmatist. And consultants that I would say just be cautious of consultants that come in and say, all you have to do this, and this, and you can stop spraying next year. That's very, very hazardous road to hoe. I wouldn't do it. But John's a pragmatist, and I would say he's the world's worst salesman for his own products. But his approach can be utilized with other products. And in fact, a majority of the techniques that he talks about, are things you source from other places. So check it out.
Amazing. Thanks, Mike. Cheers.
So I just had a question around the interrow cover crop. So it's Ingrid. I had a challenge you wouldn't have in the kangaroos ate all the barley and wheat I put in, but they interestingly didn't touch the rye corn. But my question was more around the tillage radish. So a lot of the vineyards around me use it, but I avoided it because I was a bit worried it might leave holes that would cause a trip hazard for our pickers. Do you use the tillage radish in the interrow, and have you had that problem at all?
Yeah, I showed some images of tillage radish in the interrows. It's the best. And in fact, I've actually applied it, for us, it would be just after harvest. I broadcast it in the tree rows. Then I applied mulch on top of the seed in the tree rows, let that stuff grow up at the end of the season, because for us, you'll have to convert it for your season. About the last 60 days of while we had irrigation water in September and October, the tillage radish was able to grow up, punch holes in the tree row, and not interfere with our irrigation system because the tops didn't get tall enough before we started getting our fall rains. Then it froze down in the winter for us. I mean, we're about the equivalent of Tasmania. I don't know where you farm, but as far as our weather, and then it was great. It's not a trip hazard. The holes, they kind of get filled in the first couple of times you mow and stuff. You know, they aren't like gaping where somebody's foot's going to go into it. So I wasn't worried about that at all. We were fine.
They can get pretty huge, yeah. So you have to go early just to get it to fill back in.
Yeah. I mean, I've used, hundreds of acres of stuff. I've never had anybody tripping it. Now, the other thing is, I guarantee you the kangaroos won't touch that stuff, because I work with a lot of Hispanic folks and they like spicy food and they can't eat those radishes. They are so hot. And I grew up eating a spicy food. They are hot. Gophers, you may not have gophers in Australia. God bless you if you don't, but any kind of rodents, I know you got other rodents, they won't touch the stuff. So it's good. It's really good in that way. Whereas legumes, you know, those are a sure disaster for bringing in rodents to munch your trees.
Yeah. Cool.
While we have such a mixed group on the line, what are people's thoughts about going down this path? I've certainly know of at least a couple of growers in Tasmania who, much like Mike, have looked at what they were doing and gone, this is not long-term sustainable, particularly for their soil. The Cherries Tas guys spring to mind, as people who were at our conference last week would know. They've invested quite heavily in their own mulch production business. Nick tells a really interesting story about trying it out and, you know, with the aim of just slowing down the rate of carbon loss. He found if a little was good, a lot was better, and now they're actively growing their soil carbon. And he absolutely swears black and blue by the impact and quality it certainly had on the quality of their cherry crop. So if people haven't already given it some thought, I'd certainly encourage them to at least have a look and explore and talk to some of the people who have started down this road. People like Mike are an absolute font of wisdom, and don't hesitate to reach out to them, because if there's one thing this industry is pretty good at, it's about sharing common information about pitfalls and trip hazards, because no one wants to see anyone make the same difficult mistakes they had learning.
I might just add, Michael, that if you want to just do two things to really to start, because it's overwhelming, all the different options, and everybody's going to tell you that their way is the best way, and it just can blow your mind and it can blow your wallet really fast, is I would suggest getting a side discharge mower and just letting your grass that you have in your alleyways get tall and mow that stuff over. Covering the soil is by far the best way to start. And, you know, you don't have to buy expensive compost. You don't have to make, you know, on farm facilities for it. Just blow it on over, and then try planting with equipment you have, something in the alleyway to grow over the winter time, and blow that in. That's a great place to start. And then start looking at sap analysis as well as a technique. It's two things that are probably the cheapest for you to implement, because you got to mow anyway, and a great place to start.
I know sap analysis is used quite widely down here, particularly for nutrition inputs already. So that one's certainly found a very eager audience. Are you able to shed any light on the nature of the bioactive compounds that you've found have been most beneficial?
Well, again, there's a snake oil salesman around every corner when it comes to the biostimulants, and they're all right. And the only thing you have to do is open up the jug and glug on what they're selling. I would say by far, things that come from the ocean have the most biological stimulant activity. Fish hydrolysate from marine fishes is stinky but effective. That's the smell of money out there. And seaweed, seaweed products, those are the biggest bang for the buck and work the most. I've tried lots of them, and if you're looking to just get started, either of those products would be the place to go.
Any other questions while we have an expert on this area?
I have one. Sorry, I've lost my voice, which is really hard to talk. What made you start down this path? What made you change? Why did you go from conventional to this? What was the one thing that made you change?
I think for me, it was the writing on the wall that doing the status quo and just trying to, open up a different jug of product and plop it in the spray tank or another type of fertilizer we apply. I was just seeing where we were only holding our head above water as far as our profitability. I didn't see big gains being made by that. It was just keeping us treading water. And so I wanted to really move our farm forward, and that's why I did it. I wish I could say it was to save the earth and all those sorts of things. And I mean, it does benefit that, but it was just purely a business decision that we need to look at different ways of doing things if we're going to be competitive. We manage 3,500 acres of ground, and right now, as we speak, I have over 1,000 people in harvest. That blows a lot of folks' mind, but there's competitors of ours that are much more efficient in a global market where we used to sell all kinds of fruit to Europe, and now Turkey sells fruit to Europe, and we don't even get our foot in the door. It won't be very long before our export markets in China are eating Chinese cherries instead of US cherries. And so we really have to focus on revving things up where we have opportunity to be competitive. You have to be at the top of net profit per acre if you're going to pass a farm on to a generation. And I'm the 5th generation, and I need to have the resources there for the 6th.
I'm really fortunate. I've been doing this path for about 5 years, and I took over an organic orchard, so I had a really good head start. But my father does it more the conventional way, and he's slowly coming around to my view because he can see the evidence in the fruit. It's like my fruit is consistently bigger, fresher. It's just a beautiful tasting fruit. So thank you for your time.
If you're happy, Mike, we might throw one last question. Luke's put one in the chat, which is, what type of mower do you actually use for your mulching? Is there a particular company or brand that you've found works really well?
Yes, the brand is Nobili, Nobili, Italian-made mower, and the model is SDS, Side Discharge System. It's also sold by Kuhn, which is Kuhn. In Australia, there's Kuhn equipment in Australia. I remember seeing it there, like the Kverneland and Kuhn. So that's the best one for us. So, and we've run the units over. I mean, they've mowed, thousands and thousands of acres per unit, and not had any any difference between that and a standard flail mower type of issues.